Well, hello everybody. Welcome along to my channel. I'm Brendan Kazmarek, and this is Hot Lapping History. The idea of the series is to take various categories of racing throughout history and one by one step through the development and the progress of each of these categories, and to slowly build a full set of data and a number of data points regarding both individual categories and race cars throughout history. As you might already be able to tell, we're at the Nurburgring Nordschleife. I thought about doing something different than what so many other YouTube content creators go, but where else do you go? It's the Nürburgring. So the only little twist I've added is that we're going to head out onto the Gesamtstrecke, which is, of course, the 24-hour combined circuit, most of the Grand Prix circuit, cutting out the new Mercedes Arena, and then, of course, the full Nordschleife tacked on at the end of it. It's a long lap, but it gives us a great opportunity to talk about some of the finest examples of racing cars in history, and we're starting with some of the most evocative here, of course, GT1. I've got a pre-recorded bit discussing some of the history of these cars, but as you see, this is a McLaren F1 GTR, and I'll turn it over to myself for a little bit of history about the car. Thank everybody for coming along, and on the other side of this, we'll get on track with the 1996 McLaren F1 GTR. In hindsight, we might be remembering the late 1990s as glory days for GT1 racing. Big, beautiful cars designed as one-offs for the road, simply so their mother brand could go and win Le Mans. We often refer to them as homologation specials. And beautiful though they were a small piece of the utter mess that described 1990s sports car racing. At least initially, the state of the sports car racing world in the mid-90s was much more a product of the demise of Group C and prototype racing than it was the success of the relevant new regulations. As it turned out, both the top LMP1 and the top GT1 at 1994's 24 Hours of Le Mans were hacked together remnants of Group C cars. The Toyota 94 CV, which nearly won in 1994, was developed from the 92 and 93 CVs into an LMP1 car. Retaining the same engine, the car was given a flat bottom and simpler aerodynamics to comply with the updated prototype regulations that replaced the old 3-liter formula. The Dower 962, however, won the 1994 Endurance Classic by taking almost an identical route. The Group C 962 chassis and engine were retained, and both underbody and topside aerodynamics were simplified. Crucially, Dower and Porsche had applied for homologation as an LM GT1, citing planned production of the Dower 962 road car, of which a dozen were sold after the Le Mans victory. When we think of LM GT1 through 1998, this is almost certainly what people recall. Clean, evocative designs with either little resemblance to existing road cars or closed cockpit prototypes with but one or two road-going examples. See the Mercedes CLK GTR, the Porsche 911 GT1s, and of course the Toyota GT1s. But smashed right in the middle of the hacked-up Group Cs and the homologated prototypes stands a single shining star, the McLaren F1 GTR. The road car, for starters, was the world's fastest car ever to reach full production, and with McLaren backing the Gordon Murray design, how could it not go racing? The car was developed heavily to debut in the 1995 BPR Global GT Series. Sporting a 6.1-liter BMW V12 engine restricted to 600 horsepower and 14-inch tires, the car was perhaps the only appropriate and successful example of the relevant era of GT1 regulations, and boy did it deliver. The car dominated the opening rounds of the BPR series before famously taking the 1995 24 Hours of Le Mans victory in utterly atrocious conditions, being substantially more drivable than the supposed top-class WSC prototypes. I'll let our single lap of the Nürburgring tell that story. Unfortunately, the loose homologation rules of 1996 led to the car being made almost immediately irrelevant. Porsche introduced its 911 GT1, a road car in name and number only, and McLaren was immediately required to play catch-up from a position it could almost never recover. While the development of the long-tail F1 GTR in 1997 made up substantial ground to what were fundamentally prototypes, the 1995 successes of the GTR mark the first, and possibly only, true GT1 car of the 1990s. Ladies and gentlemen, the McLaren F1 GTR. Alright everybody, here we go. It's a lap of the Nürburgring Gesamtstrecke. We are hot lapping history for the first time. The McLaren F1 GTR with cold tires, cold brakes, a quarter tank of fuel, and medium tires. It'll be the same thing for every car. Down on the brakes into turn one, super early. really just to make sure you can get the car stopped and turned in roughly towards the apex. You've just got to be so conservative here through the early part of the lap because there's no operating temperature in anything. And the car does not at all behave how it's meant to. Best thing you can do for yourself is to just be ultra conservative on the brakes. Make sure you get the car down to the apex and then push the tires a little bit more on the exit to start building the temperature. Because while there is no margin for error under braking and turn-in, there is certainly a little bit of play from the car on the throttle, and it'll let you slide the rear end just well enough to get a feel for its limitations. Just like that. Thing of beauty. Starting to get some reasonable temperature in the car now, and it's behaving just a little bit like we would expect. Tucks itself in nicely there. Important exit, because it sets you up on the long run up the hill to the, I don't know if it's still called the Vidal chicane, but it certainly used to be. Again, just really conservative here through the Grand Prix part of the lap before we set out onto the Nordschleife, which we celebrate by not getting anywhere near the apex. But I've never been good through there anyway, so use up all the road on the exit here, and we'll send ourselves down into the Hotzenbach. Normally here, it would be a short shift up into 5th gear, but not so in the mid-1990s. Through most of this lap, really, you're about a gear or so lower than you otherwise would be in a, let's say, the modern equivalent of a GT car. And again, it's all about just being as conservative as you can. Use the natural flow of the road to your advantage, and every now and then take a stab at the throttle and let the car pull itself away from the corners. Downshift there into Kudabecker Hoa, and that's about as well as we've done that. Don't always downshift going through there. Certainly on the practice laps I didn't always. But it actually kind of worked out in our favor, just allowing us to set the nose as we came over the crest. 5th gear, up over the crest at Schwedenkreuz, and immediately, almost before the car straightens out, you're hard on the brakes down into 2nd gear. Blew right past the apex there, but we locked the front left on the way in, and it just sent us sailing wide. But you kind of take your medicine and you press on. Not a bad lap so far, all things considered. Up our crest here into Adenar Forst. Again, just as conservative as you can be on the brakes. 2nd gear on the way out here. Just ride the curb on the entrance there a little bit and stay away from it on the exit, because that's what happens. Bump the upshift a little early there. We'll pull 5th just for a second. And then down into 4th gear. This would be 5th gear in a modern GT car, but again, not so in this behemoth. It's not really a behemoth, I guess it's more of a beast. Really just super limited grip. But it was still better than the WSC cars of the day, as we mentioned. And especially when the weather turned ugly at Le Mans, it was the car to have. Through my least favorite part of the Nordschleife. Whatever that little S is, followed by miss, hit, miss. The Dreifachrex, or as I like to call it, miss, miss, miss. Then down into the Ultra Mickey Mouse Versiphon, slowest corner on the track. Low grip. Road falls away on the entry, so your brakes are constantly on the verge of locking up. And just kind of make it out as best you can. Oof, early on the throttle over Breitscheid there. Should have been down into 2nd over Exmula a little earlier, I think. Would have helped the car rotate and been a little more predictable as the inside of the road rose up to meet the car. Lauda links. Braking zone awfully hard to pick out there in the trees. There we go. Yeah. While I have a second, I have to say, this is my first recording. Not my first recording ever, but it is my first recording since upgrading to a 21:9 ultra-wide monitor. And this thing is glorious. 34 inches through the trees of the Nurburgring. You've got the reflections on the windscreen. It's just unbelievable. through Kesselchen and Klostertal. Do not want that inside curve, but we were slow enough there that we could get away with it. Too busy admiring the shadows, I think. 4th gear through there. 2nd down on the brakes. Setting ourselves, should have stayed in 2nd there, but we're setting ourselves up for the run up the hill here to the carousel. That corner just earlier there is so difficult. It's flat on the exit, so any camber help you had is immediately gone. That was ugly. Always is for me. But any camber help you have there is immediately gone, and you've got to chase the car from oversteer to understeer and back again about 3 times as you get on the throttle and head up the hill. Hoacht, again, conservative as you can be. 3rd gear down into 2nd, as opposed to 4th and 3rd, as I think you might see from, say, a modern GT3 car, GTE car. Don't use too much of the curb here like we've done there, as long as you're not prepared to chase it away on the exit. Really ugly here with the gear selection, but it's just so in between gears through so much of this section, and it's got so little grip on throttle that you've got to choose between having the car rotate and then sliding on exit, or just being a little more predictable on corner exit. I'll chase it if it means I can get the car to rotate mid-corner a little better, especially considering how unpredictable this thing can be on the brakes. Into the Flansgartens, 1, 2, and 3. Ultra conservative here over the jump so we can get it turned in. A little early, so we had to chase it, but we're 3rd gear and through over the top. Let the car slide nicely over the top of the crest there. Same thing here. Could do with a short shift here if you wanted. Into 5th, but we'll hold it in 4th again just to let the car predictably make its way over the crests. And then early on the brakes here, 4th gear up the hill because you want to set yourself up nicely for this run here. We've not done that because we've completely boned the apex. 2nd gear into Schwalbenschwanz. Not done badly there. I'm going to keep it in 3rd here, bounce it off the rev limiter just for a second into Galgenkopf. Hold it partial throttle all the way down the hill here and onto the Duttinger Hoa. I know people say that VR can make them feel genuine feel in a race car, right, if they're immersed enough. I have genuinely been holding my breath for, I don't know, the better part of the last 3 minutes or so. It doesn't help that it's a little warm in here. This is something resembling an office, but man, between that and the 34-inch ultra-wide, it's just an unbelievable experience. Early on the brakes here. Let the car settle. And I think we've done it. Not getting greedy here. There we go. Let it straighten out, and then on the throttle down the front straightaway. Let's see our time. 8:28.9. That's not bad. I think I'll take that. So the next step, and hopefully the last for this video, because I'm sure it's gone on a little long already, is going to be to tie this together with some data over the course of, let's say, the generation of the cars, right? So we're doing GT1 here. What we want to do is pull some data from a Motec lap that describes how we drove the car, how comfortable it was, things like throttle position, time spent at full throttle, obviously lap time, top speed, that sort of thing is all going to be relevant to us. So we're going to go grab that data from Motec, and then we're going to plug it into a spreadsheet, and it won't make a whole bunch of sense in a vacuum, but once we get out of this and we start doing 2-3 cars up through the end of the GT1 era, we'll have some more data points, and we can really talk about how the class developed, which is what this is about. This is very fun for me. So let's go grab the data, and we'll be back with you, and we'll go talk some GT1 stuff. So with regards to our lap in the McLaren F1 GTR, the first thing I'll say is that it's difficult to use the numbers that we've gotten out of the data from the lap in any sort of meaningful context, right? There's nothing to compare it to. We know the car is a handful. We know that it is going to punish you if you drive it above, let's say, 90 or 95%. And the very best drivers can get that out of the car, the remaining 5%, but I'm not that, is the reality. So I'll give you the numbers, but what I'll say is that you should immediately go and watch the next video, and it'll provide some context for what we're looking at here, right? So the very first piece of information is our sector times, right? So for an 828.925 full lap, first sector is a 322.664, and that ends on the run out of Adenauer Forst. The second sector is a 218.7, and I believe that ends just before the carousel, or just after the carousel on the run up to Hoa Acht. And then the final sector, a 247.561. Now, what that says to me, that first sector, obviously you're bringing the tires and the brakes and everything up to temperature and getting the car to behave the way it's supposed to, but there's a lot of flow in that sector, both with the Grand Prix circuit and through the Hatzenbach and up into, let's say, Flugplatz and Orenburg. The second sector is a little more start and stop. You're dealing with some slow corners, the carousel, the corner prior to the carousel, but you're also dealing with acceleration out of second gear through a lot of those corners, and of course a long run up the hill into Klostertal and Kesselchen. So the third sector is the remainder, right, where it's between, let's say, third and fourth gear for most of it, or second and third, as I think it was in the McLaren. And all that is getting the car stopped, turned in, back in the throttle, and then repeat about 4 seconds later. So that is where, in my opinion, at least as far as we've seen from the McLaren, it's going to struggle the most, right? It's got the least amount, well, it's got downforce, but not a ton. It's got a lot of power. It's got 1990s tires because it was a 1990s car. And that's where I think you're going to see the biggest leap as we go through the next set of developments in Le Mans GT1. So the last piece of data that we're going to use from the McLaren F1 GTR here is with regards to the throttle position. Now, a lot of times what we'll use in a modern take is amount of time spent at full throttle, which, of course, at a place like this is a huge number. But I think what's more appropriate is the average throttle position, right? Because it's not just how much time do you spend at full throttle between corners, but it shows you how progressively you're coming back in the throttle, and then obviously takes into account how much time you can spend at 100% down the straightaways, between corners, that sort of thing. So that number for our lap of the Nordschleife is 64.98%, right? And when you don't have much to compare it to, that number doesn't mean a lot, but you're going to see in later laps just how much having more grip at the rear end, better tires, more downforce overall, whether there's more or less power or not, what that number is going to show is just how far the drivability of cars has come since 1995. So again, 64.98%. Hold on to those numbers, and we'll put them in some context when we get to the Porsche 911 next time around. So thanks everybody for watching. Again, next video should be up almost immediately. It's already been recorded, and I invite you to go take a look at that, and it'll really put the lap we just did, the first of our GT1 series, into some context. We'll see you soon.